My stall stood on the corner of a busy street, squeezed between a closed hardware shop and a tea vendor who hummed old songs every morning. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. I built it slowly, saving coins, borrowing tools, learning through mistakes. Each scratch on the wooden counter carried a memory of persistence. Each sunrise I greeted there felt like a small victory against a world that never gave me much for free. Family was supposed to be my shelter, especially my sister. Growing up, she was my closest person. We shared secrets under blankets, defended each other from scolding relatives, and promised that no matter what happened, we'd always stand together. Even after she married, I believed those promises still mattered. At first, she supported my stall, or at least pretended to. She visited often, smiling proudly while customers browsed. "You've done well for yourself," she'd say. But something in her eyes changed over time. The pride dulled, questions followed. "How much do you make in a day? Is this registered? Don't you think this place could be bigger, better?" Her husband came with her more frequently. He spoke loudly, laughed confidently, and acted like he knew everything. He examined my stall the way people examine something they plan to take apart. Not with curiosity, but calculation. He offered advice I never asked for and joked about managing it himself. "You're wasting potential," he said once. "With the right control, this could earn triple." I smiled politely, but something tightened in my chest. I tried to remind myself they were family, that blood meant protection, not competition. I ignored the way they spoke about my work like it already belonged to them. I ignored the slight mockery hidden inside their compliments. I ignored how my sister stopped asking how I was and only cared about what I earned. That was my mistake, because when love turns into entitlement, it stops feeling like love at all. Still, every morning I opened my stall with hope. I believed hard work would protect me, that honesty would be enough, that family would never cross certain lines. I didn't know that while I was counting my coins and greeting customers with tired smiles, my sister and her husband were counting something else. My space, my effort, my independence. I didn't know they saw my stall not as my survival, but as an obstacle. And I didn't know how quickly blood ties could break, until the day I arrived to find everything I built reduced to pieces on the ground. But that day, that betrayal was still waiting for me. The sky was pale, the street half asleep, and the smell of tea drifted through the air. I walked toward my stall with my keys in hand, already planning the day what I would restock, which customers I hoped to see, how many hours I'd need to work to cover the week's expenses. Then I saw it. At first, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were showing me. The place where my stall stood looked wrong. Empty, crooked, broken. As I stepped closer, my heart began to race. Wooden boards lay scattered like fallen bones. The counter I polished every night was split down the middle. My neatly stacked supplies were crushed beneath shattered planks. Even my hand-painted sign, the one I'd redone 3 times until the letters felt just right, was snapped in half. I dropped my keys. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The street noises faded into a dull ringing as disbelief settled into my chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't weather or bad luck. This was intentional. A nearby vendor approached slowly, his face tight with discomfort. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It happened late last night." My hands trembled as I asked who did this. He hesitated before answering. "Your sister's husband," he finally said. "She was with him." The world tilted. He explained how they argued with a local official, claiming my stall blocked space and violated rules. When they didn't get the response they wanted, anger took over, voices rose, wood cracked, and just like that, my livelihood was destroyed. I walked away before I broke down in front of strangers. When I confronted them later, I expected denial, or maybe shame. I expected something human. Instead, I was met with irritation. Her husband crossed his arms as if I had wronged him. "You should have listened to us," he said. "This could have been avoided." My sister didn't meet my eyes. "You're being dramatic," she added. "We did what was necessary." Necessary. The word burned more than the destruction itself. Then came the final blow. They demanded money, Compensation, they called it, for the trouble they caused, for the official they argued with, for the inconvenience they suffered. They spoke as if my loss didn't exist, as if my stall was an object they had every right to remove. Something inside me snapped, but not loudly. I refused. That single word changed everything. Their faces hardened. Voices rose, accusations flew. They called me selfish, ungrateful, disrespectful. By nightfall, relatives were calling to scold me for creating conflict. No one asked how I would survive. No one asked what I lost. I went home with empty hands and a shattered heart. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one truth settled in my bones. The people who destroyed my stall weren't strangers. They were family. I woke up early out of habit, only to remember there was nowhere to go. My hands still reached for tools that were no longer there. Silence replaced the familiar street noise, and with it came doubt, heavy, persistent, and cruel. Some days, the pain wasn't loud. It was quiet, settling deep in my chest, like an ache that refused to leave. Family didn't come to help. Instead, messages arrived filled with judgment. I was told to apologize, to be the bigger person, to pay what my sister and her husband demanded so peace could be restored. No one asked what peace cost me. No one cared that my only source of income was gone. I learned something painful then. Silence can be louder than insults. But I chose not to scream back. I chose to watch, to remember, to document. I returned to the broken site and took photos every splinter, every crack, every sign of deliberate damage. I spoke to vendors who had witnessed everything and wrote down their words. I gathered permits I had carefully maintained over the years. I wasn't planning revenge fueled by anger. I was preparing for justice guided by patience. While they spread stories, I rebuilt myself. I took temporary work. I cut expenses. Some nights I went to bed hungry, but I refused to beg the people who had broken me. Each struggle sharpened my resolve. Each small victory, each earned coin, reminded me that I was still capable. Weeks passed, then months. I found a new location, quieter, cleaner, overlooked by people who didn't know my family's version of events. With borrowed tools and saved money, I built again. Stronger wood, smarter layout. Lessons learned from loss carved into every decision. Customers came slowly at first. Some recognized me and returned out of loyalty. Others came because they liked my work. I treated each one with gratitude, never bitterness. My stall grew, not just in structure, but in spirit. Meanwhile, cracks began to show in my sister's life. Her husband's reputation shifted. Vendors whispered. Officials asked questions. Truth has a way of surfacing when lies are forced to stand on weak foundations. I watched quietly as the chaos they created began to circle back to them. One afternoon, my sister stood across the street, watching my new stall. She looked smaller than I remembered. Uncertain, for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the sound of breaking wood, the cold demand for money, the way she turned her face away from my pain. I didn't wave, I didn't confront her. I simply continued working, because I had learned something powerful in my silence. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rises, slowly, steadily, until it stands taller than the people who tried to tear it down. And my rise was far from over. Months of quiet rebuilding had done more than restore my stall. They had restored me. I had learned patience, persistence, and the power of letting truth do the work that anger could not. I worked early mornings, late nights, and every moment in between, but unlike before, my heart carried no illusions about who my family really was. Then the day came when everything changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first. A local business meeting was called to discuss street vendor regulations. My sister and her husband attended, expecting to manipulate the officials as they always did. But they hadn't anticipated that I had quietly collected proof of everything: the destruction, the threats, the lies. Photos, witnesses, and records lined neatly in a folder I carried with me. When the officials reviewed my evidence, the room grew quiet. My sister's confident smirks faltered. Her husband's voice, usually so booming and dismissive, trembled when asked to explain the damage to my stall and the intimidation that followed. Their outrage at being questioned turned into panic. Every excuse they had prepared evaporated in the presence of truth. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply showed what had happened. I let the facts speak louder than any anger or tears could. And the facts were undeniable. Consequences followed swiftly. The official warned them that their attempts to manipulate street regulations could result in fines and public censure. Vendors who once feared their influence began to distance themselves. Rumors of their misdeeds spread, quietly at first, then openly. Their reputation, the one they had used as a weapon, crumbled under the weight of honesty. My sister approached me later, after the meeting, her face pale. "Please, can we settle this?" she asked. "We didn't mean for things to go so far." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw not the sister I once loved, but the person who had chosen greed over family. I shook my head gently. "I already paid." I said softly, "For what?" She whispered, "For my trust." I replied, "You destroyed it, and I won't pay twice." I didn't gloat. I didn't humiliate. I simply walked back to my stall, where the smell of fresh wood and new paint filled the air. The people who mattered, my customers, my friends, the community that had quietly supported me, were there. Their smiles, their greetings, their loyalty were the sweetest revenge. That night, I locked up my stall and looked around at what I had built, not just a business, but proof of resilience. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a quiet power. I didn't need them to apologize or admit fault. I didn't need to see them falter. Justice, patience, and integrity had done it all. And as I stood there, I realized something I had never fully understood before. The sweetest revenge isn't anger or humiliation. It's living well, thriving honestly, and refusing to let anyone else steal your light. My sister and her husband had lost much more than I ever could. They had lost the trust, love, and respect that could never be rebuilt. And I had gained everything.